point is God's unchanging in His promises. This is a big deal. Let this grip our heart. There's so many bad reports, and I understand that, and people got to know what's going on. And I have to tell you, I like to watch some of the news to hear, but I've had to turn it off and say, I've got to believe the report of the Lord. I'm not blinded to what's out there, but that's man, and that's humans making observations. We've got to go back to God and His promises and say, okay, God, that's what's been said, but I choose to believe your report. Talk to me, show me, reveal to me, not so I can make it, so we can live in victory, even in a season like this, friends. And that's not a cliche, that's true. We should be victors even in a time like this. I'm so delighted how many songs, I have to be honest, probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was concerned about the songs in the church today are all about surviving, and where the songs about victory. Suddenly we've just had this influx globally of songs about victory, and it's exciting, but it's come before this situation. And I'm hoping we realize the songs of victory are in it, not when we get through it. Even in it, we've got to live in the victory, because God's promises are yes and amen. To put it simply, when Jesus makes a promise, He has no need to repeat Himself, because His promises are good forever. It's impossible for God to lie. People tell stories, people change truth, but God cannot change what He said. He's made a promise, and we've got to believe the promises of God. Yes, they might be different to how we see them, but they're still His promises, and God's in full control. There are some precious promises that you and I have been given by the Godhead, that He's spoken over us. And there are things about which the Lord will not change in His mind. He's promised to save. And I don't believe just salvation, but also save and protect, which we've talked about already. If I can let you into this, I'm not sure how many of you know this, but even one of our sons, it seems, contracted this virus. And he was sick, really sick. And we weren't able to get a test, because they're not giving tests to young people. And we weren't able to see a doctor, but we were able to connect with doctors that work with us and know us. And when I shared with one of the doctors who was on our team what's happened to Joel, they said, it sounds like coronavirus, you need to quarantine him, and you need to pray, and helped us out in that. But we put him in his room for 7 days. We prayed, I reached out to some of my friends around the world, and we've been praying and trusting. And within a couple of days, we saw absolute healing begin to take place in his body, honestly. And 7 days quarantine in his room, not in his house, in his bedroom, was hard for him, no doubt, hard for us. But by the grace of God, he is totally healed, he's out now, he's fine. And none of us, by the grace of God, at this stage, in our house, that lived in that same house, with this disease that apparently, this virus that is highly contagious, by the grace of God, none of us have got anything at this stage. So again, it's not, I'm trying to be honest about these things and say they're real, but we can trust God for His promises and His protection. He's promised to save us. He's promised to supply. He is our source, and we can all quote and say that, but at the end of the day, when times like this come, suddenly what are we going to look to? Where are we going to look? And I love that we only get to look to God where it belongs. It doesn't mean that we don't go through difficult times and maybe we've got to adjust some stuff, but He is our source. He's our supply. He's promised to supply. God will take care of us. I have to believe that. The government can't, the church can't, your leaders can't, I can't, and CMI can't, but God can and will take care of us. He's promised to satisfy us. And I think even part of what's happening now is that God's got us getting back to Him and finding our source in Him, but also our satisfaction. I long to travel. I never thought I'd say that. I'm missing getting on an airplane right now, which I never thought I'd say that. And ministry and getting out there, getting amongst people and doing all the stuff we do. But I've had to come back to this to say, I actually now need to go back to God and find my satisfaction in Jesus Christ, find it in Him. Psalm 107 verse 9 promises that He satisfies the hungry soul. And so He's promised to satisfy us, but if we press into Him, we'll be satisfied. He promised to secure us. You know, friends, there's no doctrine more precious than the doctrine of our eternal security in Jesus Christ. And I wonder how many are beginning to question salvation. And I wonder how many, based on our performance, begin to think, are we still saving? It amazes me that if you, I want to say this, if you have ever been saved, then you will ever be saved. Jesus doesn't save us to abandon us along the way. And I often wonder how people believe that a God who can't keep them can save them. In other words, it takes more power to save to begin with than it is to keep one saved. And so what I want to say, I'm not talking about one saved, always saved, but He's promised to secure us and keep us secure. This doctrine needs to kick in, especially in uncertain times. We're saved, we're blood washed, we're saved by not making promises to Jesus. We're saved by believing His promises to us. And He's powerful enough to save us, but He's also powerful enough to keep us. And let that kick in, because that doctrine is so essential. And His promises to sustain us. His promise to give us grace in the way we're going. And I want to just say there's grace for us in this. If we press into Him, He's promised to sustain us in and through this. Not that we'll come through this, that we will grow through this and be what He's called us to be coming out of this until the next thing that comes our way.